What's going on, everyone? Dots Gaming here, and today I'm bringing you guys a beginner overview to the Mage class in World of Warcraft, giving you an introduction to the class and some beginner setups that you can use to get used to the class and its mechanics. Now, this video does assume that you have at least a base understanding of World of Warcraft and are looking for a class introduction instead. So if you are watching this video and are also brand new to WoW as a game, I also do recommend checking out my WoW Complete Beginner Guide, linked in the description below, which will teach you all of the non-class specific things you need to know to get yourself started in WoW and better understand this video. But without further ado, let's get into today's video covering the Mage class. The Mage in World of Warcraft is your stereotypical magician wizard class, lobbing fire, ice, and arcane magic at their opponents. Mages can be found all over Azeroth, studying and learning more about the magical energies of the world they inhabit. The arcane forces studied by mages have been around Azeroth since the early days of elven civilization, with the events of the past causing it to be studied by elves and humans alike, and eventually spreading to all parts of Azeroth. Mages established an order known as the Kirin Tor to help manage the use and study of magic in the city of Dalaran, which has become a hub, for researching spells, artifacts, and magical items. Now, the Mage class is a pure damage dealing class with no tank or healing specialization. Mages focus on 3 primary schools of magic, with their specialization choice allowing them to focus on one school as their primary source of power. Arcane mages embrace the arcane energies, utilizing it for strong crowd control, utility, and burst when fighting their foes. Fire mages focus on utilizing fire for strong burst, single target, and area of effect damage, with the fire lingering on their opponents for some additional dot pressure. Frost mages focus on keeping their opponents frozen in their tracks and perpetually slowed down, all while lobbing a barrage of ice magic at their opponents and kiting them with ease. Frost mages can also have a water elemental pet by their side or choose to forego it for additional power. Mages are a very powerful class with strong mobility, crowd control, and damage at the cost of some tankiness, but with that being said, mages are consistently one of the strongest classes in World of Warcraft. Now, the mage's primary resource is mana, while arcane mages also utilize a resource called Arcane Charge to empower their skills. Mages wear cloth armor, utilize intellect as their primary stat, and they wield staves, wands, daggers, one-handed swords, and off-handed items excluding shields. Mages also have the unique ability to create food and water for themselves and allies at any time, teleport themselves and their allies around the world, and provide a buff that grants an increase of intellect to their party members. Now, the following builds that I have for you guys are going to be tailored towards new players looking to make your rotation as easy and straightforward as possible while adding as few additional action bar skills. Now, we're primarily going to be focusing on passive increases. So if you're looking for something more advanced or focused on just simply dealing as much damage as possible, I'd recommend checking out Icy Veins or Wowhead for their advanced setups that are more tailored towards endgame raids, Mythic Plus, and rated PvP. Now, with our first spec, we are going to kick it off with Arcane, with our first talent being Amplification. Now, this gives our Arcane Missiles, which is a channeled single target attack, the ability to fire 2 additional missiles or bolts of arcane energy over the channel whenever we use Clear Cast on this ability. Now, Clear Cast is a passive that gives us a chance when spending mana to make our next skill free and cast faster. Our next talent is going to be Slipstream. Now, this talent synchronizes really well with our first talent, Amplification, allowing the clear-casted arcane missiles to be channeled while moving. So in addition to that, though, Evocation, which is a channeled spell that increases your mana regeneration, can also be casted while moving. Our next talent is going to be Incanter's Flow. Now, this passive causes us to cycle our damage up and down, increasing our damage by up to 20% while in the heat of combat, and then going back down to 4%, and this cycle happens every 10 seconds. Our next talent is going to be Resonance. Now, this causes Arcane Barrage to deal 15% extra damage for each target struck, allowing it to have a nice increase to its damage when fighting multiple enemies. Our next talent is going to be Chrono Shift. Now, this causes your Arcane Barrage, which is that instant cast spell that I just mentioned, to slow enemies by 50% and increase your movement speed by the same amount for 5 seconds. For our next talent, we are going to be going with an active skill that I think makes the rotation a lot better, and that is going to be Arcane Orb. Now, like I said, this is an additional active skill that we have that launches an orb of arcane energy forward, dealing a large amount of damage to enemies it passes through while also generating arcane charges. And I'm going to explain arcane charges and how they work with Arcane Barrage in our rotation section. Our final regular talent is going to be Overpowered, and this increases the potency of our burst cooldown, Arcane Power, by now causing it to increase our damage by 50% and reduce the cost of our skills by 50%, allowing us to cast a ton of hard-hitting skills over its duration. Now, if you do choose to take the Arcane Mage into PvP, these are going to be the talents that I recommend, with the first one being Temporal Shield. Now, this talent causes a rift in time by causing all damage that you take over 4 seconds while shielded to be instantly reverted when the shield ends. This allows you to negate massive incoming pressure to your character in PvP by basically just undoing it after 4 seconds. Our next talent is going to be Arcane Empowerment. Now, this passive talent plays well into our first 2 talents, allowing our clear cast passive to stack up to 2 additional times and increase the damage of arcane missiles by 5% per stack. Now, the drawback is that clear casting no longer is going to reduce the mana cost of Arcane Explosion, but that's not really our concern of ours for PvP. Our final talent is going to be Netherwind Armor. Now, this reduces the chance to be critically struck by 15%, making Arcane Mage a bit tankier in PvP combat. Now, when it comes to the rotation for Arcane Mage, the good thing about the build that I have for you guys today is that the rotation is relatively straightforward, and we are going to be focusing on building up these arcane charges with our various skills and then spending them on Arcane Barrage while using our clear cast procs as they come up. The order of your rotation is going to be as follows, and you can follow the rotation I'm about to list at any point during the fight, just based off of what cooldowns you have available. But do note that anytime during your rotation you do get clear casting, you want to cast Arcane Missiles. First step is to apply Touch of the Magi. This will allow you to start building up damage to get a big burst after it expires, but it also instantly puts up 4 arcane charges. You then want to use Arcane Barrage to consume these 4 charges that were instantly put up by Touch of the Magi and empower the Arcane Barrage. Use Arcane Orb to build up some initial arcane charges. You then want to cast Arcane Blast to try to build up to 4 charges, and when you eventually do, you want to cast Arcane Barrage. And then you basically, like I said, just want to rinse and repeat this 5-step process based off of what cooldowns you have available at any given time. In terms of some offensive notes, you are going to want to cast Arcane Power when you want to deal a huge spike of damage, since it gives you a % damage increase while making your skills cheaper. Also, if you do want to generate arcane charges quickly, use Presence of Mind to make your next 2 Arcane Blasts instant casts. In addition, do make sure that Arcane Intellect is on yourself and your party at all times to maximize your magical damage. In terms of some defensive notes, if you're going to take a huge amount of damage or you just need to make yourself immune to something, use Ice Block. Now, do keep in mind though that you can't take any actions while in the Ice Block, so you aren't able to deal any damage, but thankfully you can be healed. Now, maintain your Prismatic Barrier on cooldown to make sure that you always have a damage shield up as often as possible to make sure that you are mitigating damage. You're going to want to cast Greater Invisibility when you need to slip from sight and mitigate some damage. You can also use this to drop threat off of you if needed, or sneak up on an enemy to get the first strike. You're going to want to Blink to put some distance between you and your enemy, or to reposition yourself to a more favorable offensive position. Use Frost Nova to freeze enemies in their tracks to prevent them from reaching you. Use Polymorph to crowd control problematic enemies, CCing them for up to 1 minute, but do keep in mind this is obviously shorter in PvP, but do keep in mind that any damage will break this effect. You can use Alter Time in cheeky ways to return yourself to your previous location after casting the spell again or after 10 seconds. Combine it with other skills such as Blink for some interesting plays. Finally, use Mirror Image when you need some damage mitigation, as this reduces your damage taken by 20%. In terms of our secondary stat priority for Arcane Mage when getting some gear, we are going to be prioritizing Critical Strike, Mastery, Versatility, and then Haste. In terms of some Shadowlands specific information, our recommended covenant is going to be Night Fae for all 3 mage specs, and then we're going to be using for our legendary for Arcane, Arcane Bombardment. Now, our next spec is going to be Fire, and personally, of the 3 mage specs, this is my favorite one. I actually really enjoyed Fire during the making of this guide a lot. It was really, really fun. So our first talent is going to be Searing Touch. Now this talent boosts the potency of Scorch, which is a spell that deals fire damage and can be casted while moving by causing it to do 150% increased damage and be a guaranteed critical strike to targets below 35% health. Our second talent is going to be Blazing Soul. Now this causes your Blink, which is a skill that teleports you forward, to also apply Blazing Barrier, giving you a damage shield after you successfully teleport, giving you a bit of extra techiness. And I do think that this talent in particular is a good one for newer players. If you're not as new, you can choose something else on this row. Our next talent is going to be Enchanter's Flow. This passive talent causes us to cycle our damage up and down, increasing our damage by up to 20% while in the heat of combat, and then going back down to 4%. And this cycle can happen every 10 seconds. Our next talent is going to be Flame On. Now, this reduces the cooldown of our Fire Blast, which is an instant cast spell that deals direct fire damage and automatically crits by 2 seconds, increasing the amount of charges that the skill has by 1 as well, allowing us to have 3 total charges of this skill. Our next talent is going to be Frenetic Speed. Now, casting Scorch will increase your movement speed by 30% for 3 seconds, allowing you to be really quick while you're moving and casting this skill or your instant casts. Our next talent is going to be Conflagration. Now, this causes our Fireball, which is just a casted fire spell that deals damage, to also apply a flame damage dot that lasts for 8 seconds. Now, enemies afflicted by this dot or Ignite. Now, Ignite is our mastery passive that causes our primary flame attacks to also apply a dot. Now, this has a 10% chance to cause these flame dots to flare up, dealing fire damage to nearby enemies, giving us a chance for some extra splash damage when we are fighting. Now, our next talent is going to be Kindling. Now, critical strikes from your 4 primary attacks, Fireball, Pyroblast, Fire Blast, and Phoenix Flames, which I'll go over in the rotation section, reduce the remaining cooldown on Combustion, which is our primary offensive cooldown, by 1.5 seconds, allowing you to use this cooldown more often. Now, in terms of our PvP talents, if you do choose to take the Fire Mage into PvP, our first one is going to be Flame Cannon. Now, this is a PvP talent that just turns you into a turret. So after standing still in combat for 2 seconds, your maximum health and damage are increased by 3%, and the range of your fire spells is increased by 3 yards, and this can stack up to 5 times, lasting for 5 seconds. Our next talent is going to be Pyrokinesis. Now, this effect causes your Fireball to reduce the cooldown of Combustion by 5 seconds, combining really well with Kindling to give you a constant cooldown reduction on your Combustion. Now, the final PvP talent is going to be Kleptomania. Now, this causes your spell steal to steal all buffs that your target has, but it also increases the skill's cooldown to 30 seconds. Now, this is incredibly strong because it allows you to rip off all your opponent's buffs at extremely opportune moments. Now, moving into our rotation for the Fire Mage. Now, the Fire Mage rotation I thought was incredibly enjoyable. And one of the biggest things you need to pay attention to when playing your Fire Mage is your critical hits, as these tie directly into one of our most important passives, Hot Streak. Now, Hot Streak makes it so that your next Pyroblast, which is a single target spell that has a very long cast time, or Flame Strike, an AoE skill that has a really long cast time, to make these instant cast. Now, in order to actually proc Hot Streak, you need to critically hit twice in a row. Now, thankfully, one of our skills, Fire Blast, is guaranteed to critically hit. So you're able to critically hit with something and then use Fire Blast, and then you'll automatically get Hot Streak. So the goal of the rotation for us as a Fire Mage is to cast Phoenix Flames whenever we have a charge of it, or just use Fireball if we don't. Now, once you get your first critical strike, you will be heating up, as can be seen by small indicators next to your character. And like it'll show like a little texting if you have combat text enabled. Once you are heating up, you'll want to follow up with a Fire Blast to make sure that you get that second crit in a row to proc Hot Streak. You'll then spend that proc on Pyroblast or Flame Strike, depending on if you need single target or area of effect damage, and then just simply rinse and repeat this process. Now, do keep in mind that Fire Blast can be used while casting other skills. So if you're in the middle of casting another Fireball, for example, when you get heating up, you can use Fire Blast to guarantee the Hot Streak proc, and then use Pyroblast or Flame Strike when you're done casting your previous skill. Now, in terms of some offensive notes for Fire Mage, you might be wondering where Scorch falls into this rotation that I listed above. Now, it should be used when you need to move but want to continue dealing damage. Many casters don't deal much damage while moving, but Fire Mage has has Scorch specifically for moments where fights require movement, allowing you to still deal damage while being mobile. You want to use Combustion when you want to deal a big burst of damage. This increases your critical strike by 100%, making it easy for you to continually proc Hot Streak. In addition, your Mastery is increased by 50% of your critical strike rating, so that dot is going to be hitting nice and hard. You want to cast Invisibility before a fight to sneak up on your opponent and start on the offensive, or if you need to just avoid certain monsters that you don't want to fight, or use it to drop threat if you need to. Also, make sure to maintain Arcane Intellect on yourself and your party members to maximize your magical damage. In terms of some defensive notes, if you're taking a huge amount of damage or if you need to make yourself immune to an incoming hit, use Ice Block. Do keep in mind, though, that you cannot take any actions while you are in the Ice Block. Maintaining Blazing Barrier on yourself on cooldown is important to make sure that you have your damage shield up as often as possible to mitigate some damage. You want to blink to put some distance between you and your enemy, or simply just to reposition yourself to a more favorable offensive position. You want to use Frost Nova to freeze enemies in their tracks and prevent them from reaching you. Use Polymorph to crowd control problematic enemies, CCing them for up to 1 minute, but this is shorter in PvP, but serves the same purpose. But any damage taken will break this effect that the target takes. Now, you can use Alter Time in cheeky ways to return yourself to your previous location after casting the spell again, or just after 10 seconds. So you can combine it with other skills such as Blink for some interesting plays. Use Mirror Image when you need to get some damage mitigation, as this reduces the damage you take by 20%. Now, Fire Mages do have a cheat death passive called Cauterize, which will make it so that any damage that would otherwise kill you will just drop you to 35% health instead, and then burn you for 28% of that regenerated health, while also giving you a movement speed increase. Now, in terms of our Fire Mage secondary stat priority, our first one is going to be Haste, followed by Mastery, Versatility, and Critical Strike, with our recommended Covenant for Shadowlands being Night Fae, and our recommended Legendary being Memory of the Firestorm. Now, moving into our final mage spec, and that is going to be the Frost Mage. Our first talent is Lonely Winter. Now, this causes you to no longer be able to summon your water elemental, but instead increases your damage on some of your primary skills by 25%. This talent makes the Frost Mage, in my opinion, a bit easier to play because you just don't have to worry about the pet, while also giving you a massive damage increase in the process. Now, the next talent is going to be Glacial Insulation. Now, this talent is a great one for newer players who are looking for some extra durability. By causing your Ice Barrier, which is a defensive shield that you have similarly to the shields from the previous two specs, to increase your armor by 200%. Also, when you use your Ice Block, which makes you immune to damage for a short duration, but you can't take any actions, when that expires, you'll automatically have Ice Barrier applied to your character. Our next talent is going to be Incanter's Flow. This passive talent gives us a damage cycle, so it cycles up and then cycles back down, increasing our damage by up to 20% in the heat of combat, and then going back down to 4%. And this can occur, this cycle happens every 10 seconds. Our next talent is going to be Chain Reaction. Now, this talent causes our Ice Lance, which is an instant cast frost damaging ability against frozen targets, to increase the damage of future Ice Lances by 3% for 10 seconds, stacking up to 5 times, allowing you to really ramp up your damage. And now this is also important with some of our other passive procs that I'll talk about in the rotation section. Our next talent is going to be Ice Ward. Now, this gives our Frost Nova, a skill that freezes enemies around us in place, 2 charges, allowing us to keep enemies frozen in their tracks much more frequently. Our next talent is going to be Splitting Ice. Now, this causes our Ice Lance and Icicles to deal 5% increased damage and also hit a second target nearby for 65% of the damage. Now, this just gives us some nice easy cleave damage by sending a portion of our damage to our primary target to a secondary target. Now, our final talent is going to be Thermal Void. Now, this causes our Icy Veins, which is our primary offensive cooldown, to be extended for an additional 10 seconds. In addition, Ice Lances against frozen targets will cause our Icy Veins to be extended by 1 second, giving us a ton of additional uptime on this cooldown. Now, if you do choose to take the Frost Mage into PvP, these are the talents that I would recommend, with the first one being Frostbite, giving our chill effects, which is our passive slows applied by our frost skills, a 15% chance to freeze targets in place for 4 seconds, allowing you to take full advantage of some of our chosen talents. Our next talent is going to be Deep Shatter. Now, this causes our Frostbolt, which is our primary casted frost damage skill, to deal 150% increased damage to frozen targets, giving us a big throughput increase. And our final talent is going to be Concentrated Coolness. Now, this gives our Frozen Orb 10% increased damage, and allows us to place this swirling orb of frost at any location within 40 yards, but it does no longer move. Now, this allows us to zone enemies out of a single area, or just siege frozen enemies with a barrage of frost from the orb. Now, in terms of a rotation for the Frost Mages are heavily proc-based, so if you do enjoy that type of gameplay, then Frost will be for you. You want to open the fight with Frozen Orb, and then you will be primarily casting Frostbolt using your procs as they come up. These procs will appear as a blue ice-looking icon around your character. Now, when you have a Fingers of Frost proc, which is shown on the sides of your character, you're going to want to use Ice Lance, as this makes it deal damage as if the target was frozen, which plays really well into our talent build. Now, whenever you get Brain Freeze procs, which is shown above your character, you're going to want to use Flurry, and then follow up Flurry with 2 Ice Lances. The reason for this is that when Flurry is cast with Brain Freeze, it leaves 2 stacks of a debuff called Winter's Chill on your target, which acts very similarly to Fingers of Frost. In AoE situations, be sure to place down Blizzard so that the area of effect damage can just rain on your enemies. You also want to then be sure to just recast Frozen Orb whenever it comes off of cooldown, and then when you have no procs or nothing to do, again, like I said, you will just be filling with Frostbolt. In terms of some offensive notes, you want to cast Icy Veins when you want to deal big damage, as this gives you a massive haste boost and prevents damage from delaying your spell cast. You want to cast Invisibility before a fight to sneak up on your enemy and start on the offensive, or to avoid certain monsters that you may not want to fight. You could also use this to drop threat off of you if needed. Make sure to use Arcane Intellect on yourself and your party at all times to maximize your magical damage. In terms of defensive notes, if you are taking a huge amount of damage or you need to make yourself immune to an incoming hit, use Ice Block. Now, do keep in mind that you cannot take any actions while in the block. You want to maintain Ice Barrier on yourself on cooldown to make sure that you have a damage shield up as often as possible to mitigate damage. Blink to put yourself some distance between yourself and your enemy, or to reposition you to a more favorable offensive position. You want to use Frost Nova to freeze enemies in their tracks and prevent them from reaching you, or to just hold them in place if you're in a dungeon or something. You want to use Polymorph to crowd control problem enemies, crowd controlling them for up to 1 minute. This is shorter in PvP, but serves the same purpose, and any damage will break this effect. You can use Altar of Time in cheeky ways to return yourself to your previous location after casting the spell again, or after 10 seconds, combining this with other skills such as Blink for some interesting plays. You want to use a Mirror Image when you need some damage mitigation, as this reduces the damage you take by up to 20%. And Cold Snap is something you want to use if you need one of your defensive cooldowns at a pitch, because it resets the cooldowns of many of your key abilities. Now, in terms of a secondary stat priority, you're going to want to focus on Critical Strike, followed by Haste, Versatility, and then Mastery. And again, just like the other 2 specializations, for Shadowlands Covenants, you're going to want to go with the Night Fae, but for your Legendary, you are going to want to go with Memory of Fragments of Ice. But guys, with that being said, that is going to be it for my Mage beginner guide. Hopefully you guys learned something from this and did find it helpful. And if you did, I would appreciate if you left a like on the video. If you guys want to keep up to date with all of the beginner guides I have for all of the various classes in World of Warcraft, also be sure to hit the sub button as well as hit the bell to keep notifications on. Any questions about mages, leave them below. And if you guys want to see a written version of this guide, if you want to refer to something very quickly, you can click the link in the description below to head over to the written version on my website, dotsgaming.com, and you can also find the written versions for all of the other class guides there as well. So thank you all so much for stopping by today. I very much appreciate it. As always, I'm Dots Gaming, and I'll see you all in the next one.